I'd like to welcome all of you to this workshop. The title is True and False Conscience in the Gospels and Psychoanalytic Theory. We welcome Father Jan Veselak from the Denver, Colorado area. He is a certified sex addiction therapist. He's clinical director of St. Ephraim Center, which is an Orthodox counseling center. He's currently one of the priests at All Saints of Russia Orthodox Church in Denver. But I understand within the next week, he and Matushka will be moving to Wayne, West Virginia, where he'll be serving as the second priest of Christ, the Church of Christ the Savior, and he will continue his role at St. Ephraim Center. So we welcome Father Jan. Thank you.
Now, I don't know about you, but in my work as a therapist, specializing in addictive and trauma disorders, and as a priest hearing confessions, I find that most of my clients and parishioners suffer from a sense of false guilt and false conscience, and generally hate themselves. Now, I'm going to give a conservative estimate that's about 100% who hate themselves. And they do so because they cannot live up to the moral standards that they have set for them. This does not mean these are Christian moral standards. These are personal moral standards, which could actually be quite perverted at many times, in my view. But either way, and doesn't mean then that they are morally perfect, even by their standards. In fact, they are far from it. Now, these false conscience, this guilt, generally manifests itself as a critical voice. It can be a direct voice that you hear in your head. It can be automatic thoughts, or whatever, anything in that manner. I have one client who likes to call it the bully, and I think that's really a very good term. I generally call it a critical voice for people to avoid psychobabble. But it was Freud who called it the superego. And so about 100 years ago, Freud came up with the book, The Ego and the Id. This is how it's translated into English. It's actually, he used German terms, not Latin, for what he was discussing. And he sets up a tripartite metapsychological metaphors. He starts with the it. The id. That's that part of us which is bestial, which is desire, which has no morals whatsoever. On top of that is the ego, the I, how I identify myself when I use I. That's what I'm referring to. Is that part which is connected to reality and to the world. And sitting on top of that is the over I, the superego. It's literally over I from the German. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to really look at things from an entirely Freudian perspective, but I am going to use some of the metaphorical language that he uses. Actually, my lecture here is going to be based upon the works of three secular therapists. First, Freud, interpreted via the works of Melanie Klein, which is interpreted by my new understanding of a man named Don Carveth. He is a training analyst in Toronto, and he has a book called The Still Small Voice, and it's his thesis that we need to dismantle the superego in psychotherapy and replace it with something he calls a conscience. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. Now, the first thing we need to know about what we call the over-I, the superego, is that it functions like a conscience. It is the introject of what we experience in the world. Our experiences with people, family, church, teachers, they all come into us, and we take in via filter of our experiences and everything else that goes with it. And that becomes that voice for us. It's usually very rigid and very powerful. And we hear it in terms of injunctions and mandates, that it says shoulds and musts. You should do this. Actually, it's not so much what you should do. You should be this. You should be neat and clean. You should be perfect. You should be this or that. That's how we usually hear it, and it becomes a bully for us when we fail to live up to those standards. And if they're impossible standards, we'll never live up to them, and because we'll never live up to them, we will always have this abusive voice. Now, it's derived from something called Talion law. Talion law, I'll just read it here, is the principle that criminals should receive as punishment precisely those injuries and damages they have inflicted upon their victims. Early societies applied this eye for an eye principle literally. And that's how we think. That's how the superego thinks, or the critical voice. It is punishing. Now, Talion law is more of a law of reciprocation. There are some positive sides to this, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. This is also called the law of influence. So when somebody says, you buy my widget, and I'll give you I'll give you a free decoder ring, whether you buy my widget or not. Well, you take the decoder ring, now you feel guilty, you're going to buy the widget, 18% sales increase when you do things like that. That's also Talion law, because now I took something. Oh, I owe this person this. And so we owe some force, moral force, in our minds, exacting punishment for what we do and what we don't do. Now, Freud originally believed that the purpose of psychotherapy was to dismantle the superego. Such students as Alexander and Ferenczi also agreed with that. Now, what Freud wanted to do was to replace the superego with the ego. In other words, we don't live by these mandates and injunctions, we live through reason. Now, one of the problems with this, and I think David Hume came up with this, is that you cannot derive an ought from an is. The rational mind does not tell you why you should be doing this. It can tell you how to build a bridge. It can tell you how to do this. You can reason this or that, but why should we do this? Those are values. It cannot derive that. And so Freud, when I think of this, I think of Immanuel Kant, whose Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone and some other works in ethics argued that by using pure reason as a lifestyle and a set of values, that if somebody comes up to you who's an axe murderer with an axe and says, "Where's my victim?" you are obligated to tell them the exact location where that victim is. And so that would be, in my understanding, what would happen if we had what Freud wanted. Now, later in his work on civilization and its discontents, Freud began to see a positive value to the superego. It's behind religion. This is his positive view of religion. And he didn't have a good view of religion usually, because it keeps people moral. You're going to hate yourself if you do this. So you might as well punish yourself, and you're going to keep moral. The problem is the exact opposite happens. And just parenthetically, anybody who kind of wants to kind of understand this on a very interesting basis is Paul Veselak wrote a book called Ultra Solutions, or How to Fail Most Successfully, about what happens when you try ultra solutions. Just a good book to read on that. And anyway, many people in church and society agree with Freud. That's right. Keep that harsh superego, keep that harsh conscience, and you're going to keep moral. And that was the Catholicism I grew up with. I like to say it kept me moral and saintly. It did not. Nor did anybody else, and I found out either. And so the harsh conscience does not work as a moral force for good. It does the exact opposite. So Don Carveth, in his book, again, The Still Small Voice, talks about the importance and the nature of true conscience and false conscience. And I'm going to look at that, and he develops it from a Kleinian perspective. Now, Melanie Klein was a Freudian, was an arch enemy of Anna Freud. She developed a school of thought in England that developed into object relations theory. In a nutshell, Freud believed our primary conflict is that we're basically animals. We have a reality principle that means I can't do anything I want, so I develop complexes and all that stuff in life. And he saw us as basically beasts. Melanie Klein at her school looks at, no, humans are not just about desires. We want connection, much more close to Christianity. In fact, many of her students were, early analysts, were Christians. Winnicott, Bion, and others. And Gunther, I think, was actually a minister. And they look at human relationships in terms of, well, human development in terms of relations. And she developed, in her understanding, that we have two developmental positions. This is different than stages of life, like oral, anal, whatever. There are two positions. And they're called positions because we move from one state to another, one position back and forth in life. But if we are to become healthy, we need to go from, develop both positions in life. The first position in life is called the paranoid schizoid state. Paranoid because it's all about me. And yes, it really is all about me in this state. We've developed this as children. When a child is hungry and it needs to eat, what happens is it feels anxiety. Mom's not there. Maybe she's downstairs and she's rushing up the stairs. Now, there's no time and space for the child, so 3 minutes is eternity, and for an eternity I am suffering. It is about me until I get nurtured. And a part of the issue is that we learn to be able to handle this disappointment and dissatisfaction as time gets longer and we learn to do this in life. So it's important, but our experience is first of a paranoid, that is to say, a personal anxiety about everything. It's schizoid because it's about splitting into all good, all bad. Children, if you study developmental theory, will many times develop a belief that there's a good mommy and bad mommy. And that's the paranoid schizoid position in a very brief nutshell. It's important to understand, those who work in addiction, if you know the literature and your experience, people going into treatment programs are in a paranoid schizoid state. Everything, yes, it is about them, and yes, everything is good and bad. Dichotomous thinking reigns supreme in early treatment of addiction. And it's also seen as everything's divided into good and evil, black and white, very dichotomous. The main characteristics are splitting, projection, identification, idealization, omnipotence, denial, and paranoid anxiety. That is to say, a sense of persecution. It develops in early infancy, and this is the very immature, primitive, emotionally, not chronologically, position. The next position develops into what she calls the depressive position. This has nothing to do with major depression. It's an unfortunate term, I think. It's a higher developmental stage, and this is where the child begins to realize that good mommy and bad mommy are actually the same person. There's an integration that now takes place. And so a person can be disappointing and good at the same time. People are not divided into all good or all evil. And the child can, as I say, realizes that people are good and disappointing in life. In AA, we see this projected as take what's good and leave the rest. Somebody says, that meeting sucked. My answer is, did you say sober? Yeah, well then it was a good meeting. The ability then to say, yes, there were things at this meeting I did not like. I didn't like this person. I didn't like that. That's fine. Was there anything positive about this? Well, yes. Okay. You move from an either-or position in life to a both-and type of thinking, is what really the distinction between the paranoid and the depressive positions are. And it allows us now to see people as whole persons, maybe who are fallen, not pure evil. We move from Zoroastrian worldview to a more Christian worldview in certain ways. The depressive position is called depressive because we feel depressed because we've hurt somebody. Paranoid schizoid, I am hurt by you, you're bad. Depressive position, I said something, I hurt somebody, I want to make reparations. Donald Winnicott called it the capacity for concern, which I think is a much better use of terms, or the reparative position, as Don Carver calls it. And this is how I'm looking at it. Now, we need both positions in life. Because if I say the paranoid position is the all bad one, I'm falling into a paranoid position, schizoid position. What that means then is we need that childlike state of the paranoid schizoid position. It has the wonder and the awe of life. Don Carver says in himself that when he goes to a Handel's Messiah or goes to church, his paranoid schizoid position is alive. That's the part that believes in God and believes and wonders at the music and the majesty. Yet, without the depressive position, we'll just be immature, self-indulgent children. We need the reason and the rationality. But without the paranoid schizoid position in life, we'll just be like, we'll end up like an Immanuel Kant, essentially, how I like to look at it. A person's emotional and psychical life or orientation differs on how they handle the conflict between the paranoid schizoid and the depressive positions. That is an individual's way of managing their own feelings of anxiety and guilt, determines and defines their psychic positions. Now, how does this play out in religion? Neville Symington, a former Catholic priest and psychoanalyst, wrote an excellent book called Emotion and Spirit, where he talks about two types of religion: primitive, not in terms of chronology, but in terms of emotional development, and mature. The primitive religion, having to do with maturity, lack of maturity, is basically the paranoid schizoid position. It expresses narcissism, dichotomous thinking, legalism, rigid morality, and little concern for others. It's the religion of the law. Oh my God, I ate this cookie, it's Lent, and the last ingredient was egg. I did that once. I went to, it was an old Calendar's monastery. I gave a gift, and it was like Friday, and the monk says, oh my God, there's an egg in it. Oh my God. You know, it's like, yes, I'm going to go to hell for that egg. The problem is I was raised under Sister Lucretia as a Catholic. I did believe that, but that's another problem. And we see this, many of the Pharisees, as they're described in the Gospels, have this position. In fact, much of the Gospels, in fact, the whole Bible, in many ways, is really a discussion between the conflict between these two positions, if you look at it in a certain way. The mature religious is based upon connection and mysticism. What Evelyn Underhill described the difference between mysticism and magic. Mysticism is about connection with God and personal relation. Magic is about control. And we are in a magical church in many ways because we have the mojo. We got the sacraments. We got the prayers. We got the priests. And many people will use our sacraments and prayers as magic. I have a parishioner who will, if wants to do something, says, I'm on a project, we have to say an akathist. And if we don't say the akathist and we don't do it right, or if things went wrong, she didn't pray right, it's all on her, it's her fault. God's going to punish her for not doing the prayer right. Now that's classical paganism, but that's not Christianity. But she's stuck in that position due to a lot of trauma in her past life, which is with the depressive position and a mature Christian religion, we understand that we are helpless and that there's a sense of helplessness, a sense that we need help, and we will not condemn ourselves for it. Understanding we're fallen, again, not evil. Now, one of the examples of how paranoid schizoid position works in history is we can go back to the 14th century and look at the flagellants. The bubonic plague is running around, raging, and so what do the flagellants do? God will be good to us if we beat the crap out of ourselves. And we're going to do that. Now, did they care about other people? No. If I flagellate myself, God's not going to give me the bubonic plague. I'm not going to. What about you? I don't care about you. It's about me. It's about my purity. It's about God understanding me. Did they go and, somebody died at their house? Did they bring over a casserole or whatever, or 14th century equivalent? No. Did they help the sick? No. Flagellation itself is going to make God happy. That's that type of position. And that type of legalism, then, is also manifested in the way the Pharisees condemned Christ for healing on the Sabbath. But I think more germane to the topic is that the Sunday before we read the Triodion in the liturgy, at least in the Russian Church, is Zacchaeus Sunday, preceding Sunday of Publican and Pharisee. What's the story? Jesus is in Jericho, he's walking around, he sees Zacchaeus. I'm going to your house tonight, metaphorically. Also, I'm coming into your heart. And he goes to the heart. And what does Zacchaeus do? He says, I've ripped people off. I'm going to pay them back. And I'm going to pay them back with interest. And then and only then does Jesus say, today salvation has come into this house. At only this time. After Zacchaeus moves from that P.S., I'm ripping everybody off because I have to and life is hard, to I'm going to give back. That is the Christian conscience. But even the most powerful story comes in Holy Week, when you see the two consciences blatantly at us. Judas and St. Peter, both betray Christ. What does Judas do? He comes to his senses, realizes what he has done, and he decides then that notice the ego, which in Greek and Latin is the same word, I have betrayed innocent blood. Okay. What does he do? He goes out and is judge, jury, and executioner. He's not going to waste time on God judging him or forgiving him, because he can't be forgiven. So he kills himself. False repentance. And we see it all the time in people. They may not go back, obviously hang themselves, but that self-flagellation, that self-hatred is very consistent with false conscience. What does St. Peter do? He goes and cries because he betrayed Christ. He feels bad about it. And then what does he do? He goes back and makes connection. That's what happens. He made reconciliation. In the Gospel of John, we see when Christ says, do you love me? And he says, yes. He says it 3 times. He gets a little irritated at this. Yes, that's what Christ did. That's the punishment. He brought it out to the public. Do you love me, Peter? And then you could say, as punishment, he put him in charge of the apostles. Okay. But that I can understand. But his repentance was, unlike Judas, was not about self-flagellation and self-punishment. It was about building connection. That's what true conscience is. The self-hatred and all that talk is nothing more than immature religion, immature psychological development, and we can, therapists understand trauma histories, etc. So I'm not condemning anybody for it, because they're obviously not all bad, but again, that can be understood. But when we look at it from a pastoral perspective, we need to understand what we're dealing with also. This isn't just for therapists. I want this also for clergy. Now, what we have of the paranoid schizoid position is the critical voice. when we are overwhelmed by intense feelings, what happens to our nervous system is that we hit a sense of hyperarousal. Hyperarousal will always turn to hypoarousal. This is neurological, called the polyvagal theory. This is built in neurologically. This isn't something we have a choice over. It's not a bad attitude. We will fall into listlessness, despondency, despair, and that's what happens. And of course, the critical voice will come in and says, "You're a loser. You did this. You could have done this." Then you get the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and all that stuff coming into us. And we have that way. And so what will happen is many times that people will develop an impulse disorder, i.e. addiction, to deal with that emotion. And the problem with addiction is that usually it starts out with something that we like, which makes us feel good. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If it changes our mood and changes it intensely and quickly, it's addictive. I don't care what it is. And what will happen then in addiction is that you have all these psychological, emotional problems. Then all of a sudden you say, "I'm going to take care of it by drinking," great. And all of a sudden alcohol takes over. And now you have your emotional issues. Now you have Al in your life. And you have a relationship with all this stuff, and you've got all these complex ways of dealing with it. And in my treatment in addiction, I look at emotional issues, chemical dependency process as persons. I do a little narrative work. I externalize the problem, and I personify, anthropomorphize Al, and talk. And, and I think it helps to understand that it's all about a relationship. Addiction is a relationship, a bad one, but it's an abusive one. And it follows actually the same patterns as domestic violence, if you think about it. The punishment of the critical voice inclining in terms of the paranoid schizoid position is the thought pattern of this position is survivalist. It's kill or be killed. Now, Aaron Beck, founder of cognitive therapy, says he likes to call it pre-morbid depressogenic ideation. I just love that type of talk, personally. And he believes that this is a fundamental precondition for major depression, this type of thinking, survivalism. All the guys up in Montana hiding with their guns and stuff, that thinking, he says, will create major depression in them. And then that's the paranoid side. The schizoid side leads to kind of splitting into all good or all bad, us, them. And how does that relate in religion? Well, a lot of times it relates to purity. Also true, not just moral purity, but ideological purity, which if you look at the history of the Bolshevik Revolution and communist groups, and probably fascist groups too, you have a tendency, like any cult, to get into black and white thinking, us, them. We're the good side, you're the evil side, and the good side gets smaller and smaller. And when we get smaller and smaller, especially like Christians, you know what that means. We're the faithful remnant. We got it going on. I don't know about you, but I know I'm out there with Jesus, and the Antichrist is not going to get me, whatever. And then the organization feeds upon each other and looks for heresies. Look at the old calendars movement. They can't, every one of them is without grace because everyone accuses grace. And if you think that that group has grace and they don't have grace, that means you don't have grace, that means I do. And it gets smaller and smaller. That's that type of thinking. It's a purity way of thinking, but not true moral purity. It's a purity that's based upon the fear of being contaminated, the fear of being part of something wrong. And so we use rituals, theories, beliefs to get rid magically of those impure thoughts and feelings. And it becomes then a pathological need to follow rules, obsessions about fasting, canons, and all that stuff, on and on and on. In the other way, the reparative position, the anxiety comes from hurting people. Again, we want to make connections. Now, also what we can do, let's take something that's germane to today. And that's happening with the conflict between basically the Russian and the Greeks. That's taking place. Paranoid schizoid position is that, on the Russian side, the Greeks are all bad, they're all heretics, every one of them. Now we can't have anything to do with them. Well, that's fine. The Greeks can say the same thing about us. That's paranoid schizoid. The healthy position is, okay, we have disagreements. We don't agree with you, you don't agree with us. Maybe we can work this out some way. But at the same time, so many people on both sides are pious Christians, they're good people, and we want to build connections to still have bridges with them, even though, unfortunately, the bishops are making rules that are very difficult. And that's life. Now also, what's important about the paranoid schizoid position is that, and its false conscience, is that I saw an example in St. Simeon the New Theologian. On Netflix, there was a documentary on honor killings. And in the movie, I didn't watch it with my daughter. She told me about this Christian guy, Middle Eastern, so I'm going to guess he's probably Orthodox or an Nestorian in that ballpark. I'm just guessing. And he killed his daughter in an honor killing. The woman asked, you're a Christian, isn't this against the Bible? He said, yes, he knew it. But the power of the society was greater. St. Simeon the New Theologian calls this the law of the family. And what he says, those who follow the law of the family instead of the law of God are idolaters, and their conscience, if they have one, is deficient. If they have a conscience. Already back, was it 9th century or so? He was seeing this phenomenon. It's nothing new. So what can we do about this? Well, first of all, I'm a believer, and my basic thesis is that in recovery work, the purpose of the 12-step program is not to get people to stop drinking. People stop drinking when they're asleep. People stop drinking when they're in a purge state of addiction. People do a lot of things. We a lot of times call them dry drunks. It's not recovery. The purpose of the 12-step program and recovery is to move from paranoid schizoid to depressive position. The reason why I argue this is that you come in to treatment, it's all about me, I hate the program, you're all good or all bad, this program sucks because you're in for the money, etc., etc. But the movement is, if you follow 12 steps, it's the 9th step to make amends. 10, 11, 12 are a life of amends making, continuously. That's why I argue this. Now, in my own life, I did not go through the 12 steps step by step. I do follow 12-step principles in my life because I think they're good for recovery, and they are Christian-based, and also based upon a lot of the teaching of the great religions on the things, morals, that we all kind of universally agree on. And so the first thing to do for people who are not working with addicts or who are not therapists, like clergy, is everybody needs to learn about addiction, period, because you've got addicts. And if you don't think you have addicts, you don't know anything about addiction, because you do, guaranteed. My wife, she did not want to work with addicts. She wanted to do regular psychotherapy, and found out, no, it doesn't work that way, because all our clients usually end up having some hidden addictive disorder, and you have to deal with it of some kind. Or they come from families that do. 1. 2, to think in terms of these two positions, two types of conscience. Does the client or parishioner coming in, do they have black and white thinking? Do they hate themselves? Are they rigid about rules and regulations? Give me, Father, all these prayer rules and stuff. Not that they're going to follow them, but at least give them to me so I can feel good for the moment. And when you don't, you're obviously deluded. I don't know how many times I've had people call Father Seraphim or his Matushka from St. Ephraim saying, Father Jan's deluded. He doesn't know. He believes in Freud, not the fathers of the church, because they want patristic psychotherapy. Yeah, they want the philokalia. Of course, the philokalia, if you want to work it, works great if you live in a monastery in the desert for 40 years. If you want to make it work, and of extreme asceticism, yes. That's probably not what you're going to do. In fact, I guarantee they won't do that. And they also get really mad at me when I focus on their behaviors. I'm always a Freudian when somebody says, yes, but you were talking, look, how much pornography did you look at last night? Let's talk about that. Oh, you're a Freudian. No, I'm actually not. But that's because the anxiety gets too much and they have to push back in extreme. And I'm all bad falling into that classic line. So first of all, is there a lot of self-hatred, black and white thinking? Is there guilt? First rule, non-judgment. Now why? It's not because I'm from Berkeley and then I live near Boulder, so I got all this consciousness, proofiness, which I do. Actually, the only thing I inherit from Berkeley is my right to be a coffee snob, which I am. I do inherit that right. But generally speaking, the purpose of non-judgmentalism, it opens up the curiosity and it breaks down the defense that you're going to get when all of a sudden they feel judged. So it's a therapeutic move. It also moves you from this paranoid schizoid to depressive position. Because when somebody says, I'm all bad, I'm horrible, yada, 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 and you find, well, you know, okay, yeah, well, you committed a sin, but you had some good intentions. Seeing something positive is to break that splitting. It's actually a therapeutic position to do this. It's not a nice idea. And it's not letting anybody off the hook. It's bringing that consciousness in. I had a case where at a treatment program I worked, this client says, this woman, a therapist says, she's a bitch. Why? Well, she said this. And I kind of actually agreed with him. Yeah, she is. I mean, she's really that way, one. And number two, she is an extremist in her statements. And I kind of agreed with him. But I'm not going to split with a person. I'm not saying she's right. I'm saying, but also, he's splitting. So what I did to bring the two together in this position says, well, okay, let's say you're right. Let's say you're right and she's wrong. But is there anything that might be true in what she said? And he said, oh, well, yeah. Okay, let's talk about that part. Let's tell her where she's right. Again, the purpose is to bring the extremes into connection. Yes, she can be this way, and she was. At the same time, she can also be right. And let's put the two together. That is like saying there's bad mommy and good mommy. Well, maybe the bad and good mommy are the same mommy. Which is what essentially what was happening. And so that's why it's important, I think, to explore in a non-judgmental way, and also to bring in that you're fighting the splitting. Or put it more clearly, there's a good God and evil God, that's Zoroastrianism. There is a good God, and there's fallen creatures, Christianity. Just remember, the devil's not all bad. He can't be. Father Florowski, in his book, his article on evil, says evil is the corruption of the good. Pure evil, if pure evil exists, that thing won't exist anymore. Evil has no being. We're fallen. This is the beauty of the work of John Carveth. He believes that we are fallen, and that the concept of fallen, the metaphor of fallenness, is much better than any classic psychoanalytic view, and I agree with him. That we are fallen, and therefore we're not all bad. And all badness is in itself a false conscience. And so basically, how much time do I have? About 20 minutes? Okay, I'm going to give a few minutes. Pardon me? There is hope. Darth Vader is saved. Look at the end of the last movie. I not really care about the prequels, okay? At the end, there is Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, and Yoda on the other side in their universe's version of the positive side of the Force, wherever there is. That's what Luke Skywalker sees them at the end. Because Darth Vader repented. Yeah, think about that. Yeah. Huh?
Who was that last author about fallenness?
Last author.
Don Carveth. Carveth, Don. He's a training analyst. Just to tell you, he's not all bad, he's not all good. He's a great teacher. He's got excellent, he teaches psychoanalysis, and he records his lectures. And so you can get a whole lectures on the history of psychoanalysis if you're into this stuff. I am, although I don't practice analysis. I'm actually more into polyvagal theory and somatic work and internal family system stuff. Totally non-Freudian, but I do like the concepts. I like his concept of, and he's a Christian atheist. His depressive position is atheist. His paranoid schizoid is Christian. And he talks about the two and how he goes to Mass. And he loves the wonder of the Mass. But his rational side, he's got some problems, I think, obviously. But if I said he was all bad, I'd be paranoid schizoid. and so I think that's the way to look at it. I think he has a lot to offer for us therapists. Doesn't mean I'm going to start practicing psychoanalysis. I was actually trained that way first. I didn't like it. I didn't like the type of therapy I was doing. I like strategic work. I'd rather be a Fritz Perls than a Freud, personally. But that's it. And so, very quickly, the 12 steps. Steps 1, 2, 3, get a connection outside of yourself. Get a connection with God. And if you don't believe in God, then talk about the love of the 12-step movement. And we can also say, Christians say God is love. Let the love of that group, let the connection of that group be your God for a while. I think God will work the rest out, usually. Steps 4, 5, 6 are some of the most dangerous. 4 is if you have clients or parishioners doing 12 steps, know that 4th is the hard one because it's easy to hate yourself because of it, because you talk about your moral deficits. You've done some bad stuff, I'm sure you have, and try to work to get them to understand that even though they've done those things, there's a merciful God. Bring that splitting that will happen in the 4th step. 5th step is like confession. 6th, the most important. This is the most fundamental question we ask, and Christ asked this. Do you want to be healed? 6th step, prepare yourself to be ready to ask God to remove your character defects. Do you want God to remove your character defects? Oh, yes, I don't want to be an addict. No, that's not true. Imagine life without alcohol. I would be great. No, it won't. No, it won't. Your main lover, your main comforter, and main abuser won't be there. Imagine the abandonment. 7th, 8th, and 9th, asking God to humbly remove our deficits and now start making amends. This is where the conscious changes. Step 10, 11, 12. Step 10, make a moral inventory of your day. It's in our prayer book, at least the Jordanville prayer book. At the end, it talks about, look at the day, did you commit any sins? And if you did, repent, essentially. Look at your day. Did I hurt people? Yeah, I did. Okay. Correct it. Make amends. 11. Carrying that further. And 12, living a life of helping others. Consciousness. Capacity for concern. Living the Christian life. And so finally, I'll just end with what the Bible says. Because so many people in the paranoid schizoid position really would think that we're supposed to do all this work. And we're supposed to do all these rules and follow them and make sure there's no eggs in your cookies during Lent. Please do that. You don't have to get in trouble. And this is said by the prophet Micah. It's also in Amos, and I think it's also in Isaiah or Jeremiah. God has to say this several times. Wherewith shall I come before the Lord, and how myself before high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression? Notice, kill somebody else for my sin. The fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require thee, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with my God. Only 3 requirements. Only 3. Love justice, show mercy, walk humbly with our God. Or, in the story, we tend to hate the Pharisees in the Bible, bad Pharisees. Actually, the Pharisees were generally the good guys, and oddly less legalistic than the Sadducees. There's a story about Shammai and Hillel. I just love this one. Shammai was very rigid. Hillel was the one who was kind of more about the spirit of law. A Roman soldier came to Rabbi Shammai and says, if you can stand on 1 foot and tell me the basic belief of your religion, I will convert. He took a broom, lit it on fire, and chased the centurion out. Hillel stands on his foot and says, love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your heart, as love the neighbor as thyself. The rest is commentary. Go and study. And so I think that that's how we can look at it. We are called to build a reparative consciousness and to fight splitting in the most basic ways of this lecture, is how I see it. So any questions? We have a few minutes, I think. Yes, sir.
Can you ask your question
Yeah.
into the...
Oh,
We need you to ask it in the mic, the ancient faith mic, so.
At the risk of exposing myself, who's arguing from the schizoid paranoid position, and I probably am,
okay.
it sounds to me, and please correct my misunderstanding, because I hope I'm misunderstanding, that it sounds to me that if we dispense with the canon law, and if we dispense with the fasting rules, and if we dispense with all of the other, at times seemingly strange, requirements of the Orthodox lifestyle, we dispense with ascetic effort, and frankly, we will have a Unitarian church. Because it's a very small step, and I think the modern world has taken many of these steps where we say, why do we need a priest? Why do we need a fast? Why do we need this? All I need to do is love my neighbor, love the Word, love God, and walk in repentance. And I can do that in a Unitarian church. Why do we need orthodoxy?
Fair enough. Well, with all due respect, sir, that's a little paranoid schizoid.
That was my disclaimer, but nevertheless.
No, that's exactly, yeah. If you say this, then it must be this. Not at all. I'm not speaking against the fast or asceticism. When I was talking about the eggs thing, I was more talking about the attitude of judgmentalism and I consider a false purity. Also, just on the side of about the purity thing, I have clients, I do a lot with pornography addiction. Guys will spend hours on pornography, then come in. I've had several clients do this, not just one. Says, I think I'm called to be a monk. Okay, yeah, I agree with that. Unbeknownst to them, I have actually had monastic clients who have pornography addiction. So, it's more of an attitude about purity than it is purity itself. There's nothing wrong with purity, true purity. The fast in and of itself is not for itself. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Fasting was made for man, not man for the fasting. So in other words, it's not magic. My attitude comes from the universal answer that I get from priests to every problem. Fasting, vigil, and prayers. Say a few more, read a little more pages in your prayer book, go to church, and order the vegetarian plate and you're cool. And that's not it. the ascesis is about control. Control in the positive sense, discipline. That's what it's really about. Disciplining ourselves, being able to handle our impulses and our emotions. And we do so, you have to practice that. And so and the Unitarians, as interesting as they are, and their dedicated need to convert us to liturgical dance, is, however, there's no sacraments. The sacraments are valuable in and of themselves, but they're not magic. That's why I'm attacking the magical view of it. The sacraments are necessary. We need the church because the church is the body of Christ. The church is filled with the Holy Spirit. How do we know what's right? As a Catholic, I knew what was right because God talked to the Pope and Pope talked to everybody else. We don't do that. It's the Holy Spirit that speaks to the church in the life and the dynamics of the church. And we need the sacraments. We have a history of asceticism because it works. All religions have that. And it's good for us. It's good for us to say no to our impulses. That's why fasting is good for us. It's more, not so much getting rid of anything, because I actually do not want to get rid of anything. I'm saying it's more about understanding why we do it in a healthy way. And that's that's kind of in a nutshell how I would answer that question. Anybody else? Hope I answered it well enough. Yes, sir.
I appreciate your comments on the paranoid schizo to depressive position and as a path to kind of spirituality.
Can you step up? Yes, just step around.
Yeah.
Get into both nights.
As a path to spirituality and discernment, your talk just made me think about shame and guilt, and wondering what its role is in rehabilitating or in therapeutic encounters.
Sure. Good point about, I should have talked about this. Shame and guilt. Guilt is about what you did. Shame is about who we are. Guilt is good if you are guilty. You are supposed to feel guilt if you did something wrong. I'm not advocating, I just shot up a bunch of people, but I'm feeling good about myself. It's not the Christian way of doing it. You should feel guilty, and you should feel bad if you've done something wrong. The difference is this. In the paranoid schizoid position, they feel shame about it. Shame is about I am horrible, I'm disgusting, I'm bad. Don Carveth has a good example of this in his book. He has a woman who says, I really feel bad the way I treated my coworker the other day. So he says, well, okay, planning on doing anything about it? Oh, you mean like apologize? Or something like that? No, that's not me. That's classic paranoid schizoid position. And yes, it was basically a transcript from one of his sessions. So people really are like that. The issue is that when we do something bad, rather than flagellate ourselves, we make amends. And it's our job as clergy and as therapists, I believe, to help move people to wanting to make amends. So guilt is not a bad thing. Guilt is good. Shame, it makes us incapacitated because we're so focused on ourselves and how horrible we are. If you want to understand the addictive process in a nutshell, go to Genesis. Start with the serpent talking to Eve. What does he do? He says, well, God's jealous of you if you get to eat of that fruit. She says, oh, I don't know. We're supposed to. And then she begins to feel that there's something wrong with her. Something deficient. Nothing wrong. Nothing deficient. Doubt. Then she finds that taking a certain plant substance will make her feel better. So she takes a certain plant substance and takes it. Adam does too, and all of a sudden they realize they're vulnerable, naked. They hide. Shame. And then God comes in and says, well, why are you guys naked? Oh, I don't know. What was Adam's answer? He says, she did it. Not like that. By the way, if you were a better God, you would have made a better woman, you know what I mean? One that you made, let's face it. It's like, I didn't make her. And what the woman said, the devil made me do it. And so, yeah, so now you go from feeling deficient to doing a behavior that creates shame. From shame comes lies, and from lies, then comes murder, Cain and Abel, and then comes the Tower of Babel. You see how it all leads, but from a feeling that there's something deficient in us when there isn't anything, and from lying and hiding because of shame. Had they felt guilt, Adam would have asked for forgiveness. It was in his shame that he started lying and blaming and projecting. And so I see that's how I kind of understand the addictive process, because it works the same way in daily life. We just constantly, I'm a believer, since I have Asperger's, I see things as an autistic person in terms of patterns. And so that's why I think I can appreciate psychoanalysis, because it's all about patterns repeating themselves. I can appreciate Gospels too. Everything is a repetition of the Garden of Eden in many ways. We just keep repeating the pattern over and over again. So I can imagine God gets bored by the topic after a while. I mean, here we go again. But that's what he came to save us from, by creating new paradigms and new dynamics, new patterns to imitate. That's why the lives of the saints are so good. I first became Orthodox. I hung out with a lot of people who had PhDs from impressive universities, and they tend to dismiss the lives of the saints because they're boring or whatever. They're certainly not intellectually stimulating. No, but they're the ones that give us the paradigms of life. Yes, I don't really relate to some of the martyrs and stuff. I'm not going to be thrown into an arena and eaten by lions, etc. That's true. But how do you know that won't happen in the future? You don't. These create patterns and paradigms that we internalize. And so something happens in life, and all of a sudden we think of, I remember this saint guy, he said this when this, something like this, oh, I can use the same technique. And that's how we learn and internalize. We internalize that which is good. That's why we had the teachings of the church, the sacraments. That's why we have the fasting. Practice self-discipline. Why we have a calendar to order our life with feasts and fasts. To go over the cycle over and over again every year. Dormition comes, 2 weeks, next thing, we were looking past at Pascha, now we're looking forward to Christmas. Every year, we repeat the cycle, because hopefully every year as we do this cycle and live the stories, which is myth in the positive sense, we live them. And hopefully those myths are transformative. I mean, I didn't talk about that stuff, because that's not what the topic of the conversation. But yes, that's why I think we do all this. And we have to approach it with the attitude of relationship, mysticism, not legalism and magic. So that's kind of the gist of a lot of what I'm talking about. Maybe another question, if I may. Yes, sir.
I guess you could entitle my question something about in defense of the paranoid schizoid position. Mm-hmm. The neocleinians write about not maybe so much rigid, fixed positions of depression and paranoid schizoid, but moving back and forth.
We need to.
And that we need to, seemingly, for growth.
Yes.
That if we get too content in growth with, say, 12 steps, you often go back to one.
That's right.
and so forth. Our need for God is restored.
That's right.
Okay, so I hear you nodding. I was hoping you could comment maybe on that. Maybe it's normal to fluidly move back and forth between paranoid schizoid and depressive, and
absolutely.
Instead of rigidly stuck.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. The term position is kind of like, the first metaphor I heard was geology. You have one group over on top of another. It's more like a step. I'm on first step, second step, first step, going back and forth, up and down. Yes, we do, and we have to do that because, again, without that childlike wonder and the childlike, it's also following Talion law. I forgot this part. It's the eye for an eye. If you notice babies, When they're fed, they try to feed mommy back. That's also Italian law. And that's the law of reciprocation. And so that's the positive side of the paranoid schizoid state. Yes, I've done evil, I must be punished, but I've also done good. And also people are doing good to me, I want to give back. Yes, and so yes, we do need, and this, again, Carver's correcting this, we need to go back, because without both positions, we will be two split beings rather than integrated. Yeah, so yeah.
Break each other up or
Like I said, if I said the PS position was all bad, I'd be following a PS position. There is kind of that law, yes, I agree with the client.
I want to thank Father Jan for his excellent presentation.
Thank you.